Hello and welcome everyone to the fifth module of our Train the Trainer program. In this session, we'll be diving into step 3, Freshwater, of the SBTN target setting process. My name is Paul Olawale Johnson and I work with a science-based target network supporting corporate engagement. Today, I'm also joined by colleagues from the Freshwater Hub. I have Kari Vigostu from the Nature Conservancy and Gian De Silva from the World Wildlife Fund. They've been instrumental in co-developing this curriculum with us, and they'll be introducing to you the final technical training of this initial Train the Trainer curriculum. Let's get started. Before we dive into the contents of today's module, let's do a quick recap of where we are in the Train the Trainer program. This will help set the stage for today's session. A quick reminder about our Train the Trainer curriculum. It consists of 5 initial modules covering the first 3 steps of SBTN methods. These, along with a general overview module, lay the foundation for engaging the target setting process. These modules are meant to be completed in sequential order, starting with the general overview module, and now we are in module 5, Freshwater, which marks the completion of the initial Train the Trainer curriculum. Now, let's walk through the objectives and key contents for this module, Step 3, Freshwater. You might notice that some parts of this session sounds a bit scripted, and that's because it is. It's very important to us at SBTN to communicate this guidance effectively and accurately to we at SBTN, but also for the companies and organizations that will be using this guidance. So if it sounds a bit structured, that's intentional. In this module, we will be covering 4 key objectives, which will help you in 1. Mastering the basics of Step 3, Freshwater, and how it fits into the overall framework. You'll also learn how to conduct Step 3A through to Step 3D. At the end of this module, you should be able to answer the most common questions about SBTN Freshwater targets. Handing it over to Kari and Gian to dive into the contents of today's session.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Gian De Silva and I'm with WWF, and I'm going to set the stage for Step 3 as well as take you through Step 3A. So our first objective is to understand Step 3 of the freshwater methods and how it fits into the 5-step framework, as well as what are the intended objectives and outputs. So we are now at the 3rd step of the 5-step process, and that 5-step process takes companies through assessing their impacts with regard to specific pressures, identifying parts of their operations and upstream supply chain locations to focus on, to setting targets for freshwater quantity and quality, all the way to measuring, reporting, and verifying progress against those targets. In this module, we aim to guide companies through the process of setting location-specific targets and science-based targets for freshwater. These targets are based on the assessment of freshwater use and pollution that companies complete during SBTN Steps 1 and 2, along with the prioritization of locations that directs companies to start with places where nature needs it most. You then use the Step 3 methods to set and validate targets that will allow for quantifiable contributions to reducing company pressures on freshwater quantity and quality. Note that these targets are basin specific and, where possible, use local models and bottom-up knowledge to enable the best fit for local environmental and social conditions. Freshwater methods for freshwater quantity, that's water withdrawals, and water quality, that's nutrient loading in this version, help companies define targets to reduce their environmental pressures on freshwater systems in accordance with the capacity of the environment and the current realities of human pressures on these systems. As such, specific targets can be set with the right ambition levels and rooted in science, as opposed to setting targets based on a general direction of travel. So you may be wondering, what is currently covered in this version of the methods and what may be coming next? This version focuses on setting targets for direct operations, upstream supply chains related to freshwater quantity, that's surface water flows, and groundwater levels for which local models and thresholds exist, and freshwater quality, that's nutrient pollution. So what is not covered? Number one, what is not covered are groundwater levels where local models do not exist. Number two, targets for toxic chemicals and other freshwater quality parameters. And number three, downstream value chain activities like consumer use of water are currently not included and may be developed in future iterations. While biodiversity does not appear explicitly as part of the Step 3 freshwater methods, it is embedded implicitly within them. SBTN recognizes that the health of freshwater biodiversity and that of freshwater systems are interlinked and in some contexts may not even be distinguishable. Hence, all actions to maintain or improve the state of nature will effectively support biodiversity. In steps 1 and 2, companies must incorporate biodiversity state of nature metrics to prioritize action on freshwater targets in basins critical for mitigating biodiversity loss. Recommended freshwater biodiversity metrics can be found in the Step 1 methods. This module will allow you to determine which freshwater targets a company should set and how setting freshwater targets works. As mentioned earlier, for freshwater Step 3, there are 4 main sub-steps to get there. Step 3A, the hydrological model selection, consists of a consultation process with stakeholders and results in the identification of an appropriate hydrological model used to set targets in the basin. Step 3B, the baseline pressure calculation, takes advantage of environmental data acquired in Step 1 to identify any other activities located in the same basin and to aggregate the pressures coming from all of them so that the targets cover all of a company's activities in the area. Step 3C, the environmental thresholds identification, uses the models identified in Step 3A to understand natural and real conditions of the basin and estimate how much environmental pressures should be reduced at the basin level beyond the company's individual activities to safeguard ecological processes. Step 3D is the freshwater target setting step. Companies do this by applying the basin-wide required reductions to the company's baseline pressures for the basin. Overall, after completing Step 3 of the freshwater methods, you will have identified water quantity or quality models to set targets, calculated baseline water withdrawals or nutrient pollution loading in the basins where the company is setting targets, and calculated targets for water quantity or water quality in accordance with the needs of nature. Before you begin with the process of setting freshwater targets, you must keep in mind a few considerations. First, companies must evaluate the availability and quality of their data for both direct operations and upstream supply chain activities and prioritize primary data whenever possible. This limits the risk of potential inaccuracies and the need for future refinements. Secondly, it will be crucial to prioritize locally developed modeling approaches when available, as they are specifically tailored towards the unique characteristics of a given basin, and this leads to more accurate and relevant results, while globally developed models come with inherent limitations. Lastly, companies will have to clearly document data sources, methodologies, model choices, and any limitations encountered. This will be key for target validation. Now that we've explained the basic requirements and considerations of the SBTN freshwater targets, let's dive into Step 3A, which is on selecting a hydrological model. Before we get started, we'd like to kick off by highlighting the tasks you will be expected to perform as part of Step 3A. These are, number 1, identifying the river basin where the company's prioritized site is located for each activity or location. Number 2, consulting the hydrological model database for local models. Number 3, asking government officers and NGO stakeholders in the country for potential local models that could be used to set targets. Number 4, asking local communities and experts in the region for potential local models that could be used to set targets with. And number 5, if no local model is found, using the globally developed hydrological model to set targets with. Before getting started, a company should check that they have the minimum required data for completing step 3 for both water quantity and water quality based on the information gathered in steps 1 and 2. Additional details on some of the two terms used here, like primary and secondary data and point and non-point sources, can be found in the Freshwater Methods document. However, a general rule that applies across all the data is that the more spatially specific and the more primary data that can be collected, the better. One thing to keep in mind at this stage is that during this data collection step, it will be crucial to engage with local stakeholders to identify relevant information to inform the appropriate modeling approach, as we will see during this training. Along this module, we will also see what the data requirements are in detail, but for your reference, this and the following slide depict a quick summary of what those data requirements will be for water quantity and quality. Within water quantity and quality pressures, SBTN distinguishes two types of models, global models and local models, to understand the unique context of each basin. Global models allow wider application of the method due to greater spatial coverage. The availability of local models and thresholds are sparser, but they will provide better accuracy when setting targets compared to global models. SBTN requires companies to identify appropriate local models for their top priority basins. Companies need to consult national and local stakeholders to identify these models, or as illustrated in the decision tree in the following slide. SBTN has identified and provided global models for water quantity and quality that can be used in locations that are ranked lower and or do not have local models available. The basin level used by companies will be determined by the modeling approach they select and the pressure targeted, i.e. withdrawals and or pollution, and may be a finer scale than the spatial scale used in steps 1 and 2 methods. For example, in the globally developed approach for freshwater quantity that applies Hogaboom's water quantity global model, Freshwater level 5 basins would be used, whereas in the globally developed approach for water quality that applies results from McDowell et al. In the SBTN State of Nature Layers app, Freshwater level 6 basins would be selected. So the basin level for the locally developed approaches will depend on the scientific local model. As mentioned, step 3 includes a multi-staged search process that will guide a company to identify an appropriate hydrological model to set targets. These tasks are part of a decision tree that is included in the technical guidance and simplified here. This approach helps a company to focus efforts on finding local hydrological models only in top priority basins and move quickly to the use of global models to set targets in all other basins. So here's a quick walkthrough of this decision tree. The first stage of the decision tree would be to consult SBTN's hydrological model database, which is currently under beta version and consultation. And you would do this to check whether there are known local models and locally accepted thresholds for the basin. In the second stage, companies are required to consult national level stakeholders on the existence of any appropriate local model for the basin of interest. Such stakeholders could include national water authorities or ministries involved in water resource allocation or country offices of SBTN Freshwater Hub partner organizations. For all top basins, they must identify local level stakeholders and consult them on the existence of appropriate local models. If there are no appropriate local or global models available, companies shall continue to consult the SBTN Basin Threshold tool annually to see if a local water model has been included, and in the meantime consider options at their disposal, which we will cover shortly. For all other basins in the target boundary, companies may use global models to set and have validated targets. You can find the full detailed decision tree in the appendix of this guidance. Now that we've seen the main steps of the decision tree, let's look at some of the key considerations behind these steps. In the first stage of the consultation process, companies access SBTN's hydrological model database to check whether there are known local models and locally accepted thresholds for the basin. While this tool is still in development, companies may move on to the next stage. The tool coverage will grow over time. SBTN will populate this tool as companies set and validate targets using local models and thresholds. So the tool will increase coverage over time. So what criteria does an appropriate local model satisfy? Well, one, it safeguards aquatic ecosystems, so i.e. it includes environmental flows. It accounts for major anthropological disturbances to local hydrology and nutrient levels. It accounts for existing water use rights and access needs. And it allows for the calculation of local thresholds if one has not already been established for the basin. In the second phase of the decision tree, a company's search for local hydrological models continues with a national level stakeholder consultation. Here, they identify and reach out to experts and stakeholders based in the basin's country to ask them if they know of any appropriate local hydrological models for the basin. An example of national level stakeholders here are national water authorities or ministries and/or country offices of SBT and Freshwater Hub partner organizations. We recommend companies identify all basins in the country for which they will set targets so that they do this consultation only once per country. Note there is no minimum number of stakeholders required. If the national level stakeholder consultation leads to an appropriate local model, the company must use this local model for target setting, following the recommendation from the stakeholders on which model is preferred. If the national level consultation fails to deliver an appropriate local model, companies must refer to the results of Step 2, where the basins have been ranked to understand how to proceed with each basin. The records of the consultation process need to be saved using the SBTN data template, which will be available by early 2025 as part of the target submission for validation. To meet the criteria for validation for the consultation process, companies need to document a few items, including a stakeholder mapping exercise with the basin of interest. This prioritizes stakeholders knowledgeable about existing models and thresholds in the given basin, including any combination of the following, like national water authorities, NGOs, etc. They also need documentation summarizing whether local stakeholders are able to support 1. The identification of any existing local thresholds or targets, 2. The identification of a scientific model approach, and 3. The provision or sharing of local models, thresholds, and/or data. Then finally, companies need a record of people contacted at the Basin Management Authority or Water Resources Agency for the given basin, and their response regarding the existence of local models and thresholds for freshwater quantity and quality. We then continue the search for local models with a local level stakeholder consultation, which is only required for the 10% of a company's basins defined as top priority. Here we identify and reach out to local experts and other stakeholders operating in the basin. Appropriate stakeholders can be water management agencies and basin authorities, governmental regulators, scientists and academics involved in the basin, local water-related NGOs or local chapters of international NGOs, local communities and/or indigenous groups or their representatives, and local departments involved in water supply. Once identified, we ask stakeholders if any local hydrological model is known for the basin, considering SBTN's appropriateness criteria. If a local model is recommended by at least 3 different stakeholder types, we can use this model to set targets. Alternatively, we can use this model if one stakeholder can demonstrate it is appropriate with supporting evidence of being protective of nature. If it is the second option, it is recommended to check in with at least one additional stakeholder for confirmation on the model selection. If no appropriate local models are used, we continue the consultation by asking these same stakeholders if they would consider the global water quantity and quality models to be appropriate to use in the local conditions. Note there are a few cases where a global model cannot be used and which are outlined in the orange box in the bottom right here. If these stakeholders consider the global model appropriate for the local conditions, we can use the global model to set targets. Otherwise, a company may conclude that it's not possible to set science-based targets in this basin as there are no appropriate local or global models to set targets with. So, if that's the case, what guidance is there on what to do when targets cannot be set in a given basin? First, companies should save the records of the consultation process as they will need them in the submission for validation. Second, if the company were to consider a basin to be temporarily outside of the water target boundary, that's quantity or quality, that would mean it would not need to set targets in that basin to complete target boundary coverage, and it would need to remove it from any associated claims. Instead, the company could consider either funding or contributing to the development of a local model for the basin if this was an important basin for the company, or alternatively reach out to external initiatives such as the Alliance for Water Stewardship or the organizations who developed contextual water targets to set targets or other relevant measures using their frameworks and tools outside of the SBTN method and not subject to validation or SBTN related claims. This section provides hypothetical examples of how a company, Ursus Nourishment in this case, has set targets for water-related pressures at sites prioritized in Step 2. The examples focus on water use and water pollution for two of the company's top priority basins within its direct operations and upstream target boundary for each of these pressures, as identified at the end of the Step 2B ranking step. For simplicity, the examples focus on one direct operations basin, that's in Belgium, the Meuse Basin, and one upstream basin, that's in the US, Middle San Joaquin Basin. These were each among the top ranked basins for both water use and water pollution. For context, and if you remember from previous modules, Ursus Nourishment is a food and beverage producer that specializes in plant-based drinks and food. The company's activities range from crop production, processing of raw commodities, and packaging of finished goods. They purchase major commodities including almonds, cocoa, corn, maize, soybean, timber in the form of paperboard, as well as other ingredients such as sugar from sugarcane and additives. Because the SBTN basin threshold tool is still in development, the Ursus team skipped this first node in the Step 3 model selection decision tree and proceeded to the national level stakeholder consultation to determine if models were available for the Meuse and Middle San Joaquin basins. The team began a stakeholder mapping exercise that listed the stakeholders it was in contact with across the national and local stakeholders identified in the SBTN guidance. See sections 3.1.2 and 3.1.3 in the Step 3 freshwater methods. After this list was created, the Ursus team reached out to the stakeholders it had identified, beginning at the national level. One of their contacts in Belgium confirmed that there are local models for both water quantity and quality in the basin. They believe that the water quantity model developed by the local basin authority is appropriate for use for Ursus's target setting process because it satisfied the needed criteria. For example, it includes environmental flows and natural flow regime alterations and has been ground tested in the basin. For water quality, their contact was not sure if the identified model, which was developed by a university, met all the criteria required. Since national level consultation did not yield an appropriate model for water quality, Ursus proceeded to local consultation. The Ursus team identified and reached out to 3 local stakeholders, a basin authority, a water utility, and a university with the questions outlined in the Step 3 freshwater methods as follows. They first asked if there are local modeling approaches used by the local water authority to manage water quality in the basin. The basin authority confirmed that it is not yet using any water quality model to manage water in the basin. The team then moved on to the next question to ask the basin authority, the water utility, and the university if there are appropriate local water models and thresholds for the water quality in the basin. Both the basin authority and the water utility were aware of the model that was developed by the university, but they had not reviewed it in depth. The basin authority was supportive of exploring use of the university's model as it was considering doing so as well in the future. Ursus was then able to meet with the university researcher who confirmed that the water quality model is appropriate for target setting. So that means that Ursus was able to select a local model appropriate for use for water quality. We saw how Ursus went about identifying and finding local models appropriate to use for water quality and quantity for its Belgian basin. However, for its Middle San Joaquin Basin in the US, finding a local model was not as easy. For the national level consultation in the San Joaquin, the Ursus team consulted WWF US on the existence of any appropriate local models for water quantity and quality, as well as other local stakeholders. None of the contacted stakeholders were aware of any local models for water quality or quantity for the basin. This indicated that URSUS would need to use a global model to complete its target setting for both quality and quantity in the Middle San Joaquin Basin. URSUS completed the consultation process for validating by documenting and submitting a list of stakeholders it contacted, all the email exchanges with identified national and local level stakeholders in Belgium and the United States. As a result of this process, the URSUS team will use the locally developed modeling approach for water use and water pollution in the Meuse Basin in Belgium and the globally developed modeling approach for water use and water pollution in the Middle San Joaquin Basin in the US. Note this example is all hypothetical. Okay, next we're going to take a look at step 3B, and I'll pass it on to my colleague Carrie to take it from here.
Thanks, Guyan. Now, let's look into how to conduct step 3B, in which companies calculate baseline pressures. Before we get started, we'd like to highlight, in the case of step 3B, there will be two key tasks to perform. First, companies identify additional activities in a given basin, and then they can calculate baseline values. To be able to identify additional activities in the basin, companies need to determine which spatial scale to use. This is important to remember, as basins or watersheds or catchments can be defined at different levels of spatial aggregation, and each modeling approach will have a spatial resolution with implications for target setting and site inclusion in that basin. Within the freshwater methods, we refer to the Freshwater coding system, which uses a hierarchical, nested approach to classify and group river basins based on their spatial scale. The Freshwater system defines 6 levels, where level 6 basins are contained within level 5 basins, level 5 basins are contained within level 4 basins, and so on. When it comes to local models, there is no fixed requirement, but they must be Freshwater level 5 or finer. For global models, for freshwater quantity, the Hodge-Booms model requires the use of Freshwater level 5. For freshwater quality, the McDowell et al. Global model requires the use of a Freshwater level 4. We can alternatively use the globally developed modeling approach at a larger spatial resolution than the aggregated pressure data, as long as we clearly state in the target setting language the model scale in comparison to the target setting basin boundary. After defining the spatial resolution, we can then compile our activities at the basin level used in the model. For example, in the infographic shown here, depending on the basin level, we will compile sites differently. For a company with 3 priority sites at level 6, each of these sites is located in a different basin. At level 5, sites B and C are located in the same basin, while site A is located in a separate basin. And at level 4, all 3 sites are located in the same basin. Data requirements differ for freshwater quantity and freshwater quality baseline calculations. For freshwater quantity, the aggregation of total water withdrawals from all the company's activities within a given basin level and time period is recorded as its water quantity baseline value for that basin. Knowing baseline values will be needed for each of the basins within the target boundary. The output of this step is therefore a measurement of a company's baseline withdrawals as an indication of its overall water use for each basin. As for the data required, it depends on the location in the value chain. For direct operations, the baseline value must be defined based on primary data, for example, metering of water use, for all priority sites. For upstream, the baseline can be calculated either from primary or secondary data, such as modeled estimates, using blue water footprints. Companies must use the average aggregate withdrawals over the last 5 full years of operation to represent the baseline, unless this time period is not representative of their operations or typical environmental conditions. To calculate the baseline for water quality pressures, companies must aggregate the total present-day load of nutrients from all their facilities and or sourcing locations within a specified basin and time period, recording as their freshwater quality baseline value. The output here is therefore a measurement of a company's baseline nutrient loads as an indication of its overall freshwater pollution for nitrogen and phosphorus for each basin. The data required depends on the pollutant source. For point sources, for example, discharges from a single identifiable conduit, these require primary data on discharge flow and nutrient concentration. Non-point sources may be estimated from secondary data, including results of a locally developed model calibrated to site-specific data, or from gray water footprints. Let's look into how to conduct Step 3C and 3D for calculating baseline pressures and finally setting freshwater targets. Here, our main task will be applying the hydrological data we obtained from the earlier substep to our basins, estimating the required percentage reduction for our water pressure in the whole basin, and finally, applying the reduction percentage to the company's baseline of water withdrawals or nutrient pollutant loading to set water quantity and water quality targets. Having recorded the total baseline for the basin, it is time to use the model selected in Step 3A to understand the hydrology of the region. For water quantity targets, we need to apply 3 data points for the basin: present-day stream flows, natural stream flows, and environmental flow requirements. You'll find what each entails in the content of this slide. Present-day stream flows reflect the observed volumes of water in the basin. In other words, they indicate how much water is carried by a river or held in an aquifer or lake. Natural stream flows reflect the theoretical flow of water that will be found in the basin in an average year and in a natural state where no water was withdrawn for human uses. From the 2 points above, it's possible to infer the amount of water that is being removed from the basin by human uses. Environmental flow requirements represent the amount of water that should be in the stream to maintain adequate ecological conditions. As for water quality targets, we need to apply 2 data points for the basin: maximum allowable nutrient loads and current nutrient loads. Maximum allowable nutrient loads describe the maximum amount of nutrient concentration for nitrogen and phosphorus that could be present in the ecosystem before they cause eutrophication or other ecosystem health problems. Current nutrient loads refer to the observed concentration of nitrogen and phosphorus in the ecosystem. The methods only require identifying the concentration of one of the 2 nutrients, whichever is scarce relative to the other, and which is called the limiting nutrient. To get this information, we can revert to the McDowell 2020 model, which will indicate for each basin what the limiting nutrient is. If using local models, these may use different ratios on account of local conditions. On this point, please note that a company shall only set targets to reduce the nutrient loading of the limiting nutrient, as the remaining amounts of the other nutrient will not lead to eutrophication in the ecosystem. Having collected all the key parameters for the basin, we need to calculate the reductions in water withdrawals or nutrient pollutant loading required to bring the basin back to a healthy state. The methods refer to these quantities as required basin-wide reductions, and they are defined as a percentage of the current basin-wide pressures. If using the global quantity model by Hodgebloom, the online tool would display the required basin-wide reductions in water withdrawals. If not using the global model, first, we need to calculate the excess withdrawals in the basin as the environmental flow requirements minus the present-day stream flows. Then we calculate the present-day withdrawals as the natural stream flows minus the present-day flows. Finally, we calculate the required basin-wide reduction as the excess withdrawals divided by present-day withdrawals, expressed as a percentage. This should be done on a monthly basis. As discussed before, following stakeholder consultation, the URSUS team decided that local e-flow requirements and results from a locally developed model were available for the Meuse Basin in Belgium. Therefore, the team chose to set a freshwater quantity target using these tools and the back calculation from the existing results approach. Because accessing model results requires special technical expertise, the team engaged with a technical consultancy to assist it. The team began by specifying its baseline, the cumulative pressures of the company's operations. Its facility directly monitors its water use, withdrawing water at a rate of 10,000 cubic meters a year, or 0.3 million liters a month on average. These values are shown in Table 1 for a single year in the next slide, along with the required reduction percentage for each month. For the example year depicted in Table 1, no reductions were required for 10 months of the year because present-day stream flows exceeded e-flow requirements for those months. Because the model simulates a 40-year period of record, the final step for the URSUS team, in this example, was to repeat the flow calculations, environmental, natural, and present day, in Table 1 for each year in the period of simulation, and rank the required reduction percentage by month and year as shown in Table 2. Note that the ranking is performed independently by month, such that each row in Table 2 may correspond to multiple years. As mentioned, the e-flow requirements have been specified in the locally developed model on a monthly basis. Hydrologic model results were available for river flows in the Meuse Basin, representing the natural streamflow regime and the present-day streamflow regime, and were compiled into monthly averages. The bottom row shows the required reduction percentage, and here you can see that reductions are only required for August and September. You now see Table 2 with the calculated reduction percentages for a 40-year period of record. For each month, URSUS independently ranked the values for each month across years from lowest to highest percent reduction for the Meuse Basin. The 31st highest reduction percentage corresponds to the 75th percentile. For water quality targets, we first calculate the excess nutrient concentration as the current nutrient concentration minus the maximum allowable nutrient concentration. Then we calculate the required basin-wide reduction by dividing the excess nutrient concentration by the current nutrient concentration and express this as a percentage. Recall that we will only do this for the limiting nutrient. For the Middle San Joaquin Basin, where URSUS grows tree nuts in the United States, following stakeholder consultation, the team determined that no site-specific water quality model or nutrient concentration threshold had been developed. Therefore, the team chose to set a freshwater quality target using a globally developed approach. For its baseline, URSUS determined that its suppliers are located in a single level 6 basin consistent with reprocessed McDowell et al. Results in the SBTN State of Nature Water Layers app, with a calculated phosphorus load from Table 8 in Step 2 of the case study of 28,800 kilograms of phosphorus per year. The SBTN State of Nature Water Layers app was used to define the median growing season nutrient concentrations and the limiting nutrient. The limiting nutrient for McDowell in the app for the Middle San Joaquin Basin is phosphorus, such that no reductions were required for nitrogen. Because phosphorus is a limiting nutrient, the company applied equation 3 from the Step 3 technical guidance to define the required reduction percentage using the site-specific predicted median growing season total phosphorus concentration of 0.17 milligrams per liter and the global phosphorus threshold provided by McDowell et al. Of 0.046 milligrams per liter. As a result, the required reduction percentage calculated is 73%, and this was calculated by subtracting 0.046 from 0.17 and dividing that by 0.17. For top priority basins, if the McDowell map shows acceptable levels, that indicates thresholds are being met. So we can set a target at the site's current baseline level and follow SBTN's mitigation hierarchy. We recommend companies continue to search for appropriate local water models. Once the SBTN Basin Threshold tool is published, the company will consult the tool annually to see if a local water modeling approach has been included. For a future version 2 of the methods, SBTN's Freshwater Hub may explore setting an allowable growth target percent, not to exceed the basin-wide percentage increase that would satisfy the basin threshold determined by a local model. So, what should you do if the models show a 0 or negative reduction for withdrawal targets? If it can be demonstrated that the existing basin-wide threshold is protective of nature, you can set a target at the site's current baseline levels and follow SBTN's mitigation hierarchy. If the existing basin-wide threshold is not protective of nature, you will have to use calculated science-based targets following the model selection decision tree. Finally, on Step 3D, we can calculate the share of the basin-wide reductions that will be borne by the company. This is called allocation. And while there are different approaches to define it, the first release of SBTN methods use only the equal contraction of efforts approach. With this approach, one assumes that the company and every other stakeholder withdrawing water or loading nutrient pollutants in the basin will reduce their pressures by the same percentage. To calculate the company's targets, we multiply the aggregated baseline for the basin by the basin-wide required reduction percentage. So the company target equals baseline pressure times required basin-wide reduction. Let's look at how the URSUS team set a freshwater quantity target for its Mius basin. If we go back to our Table 2, it shows reduction percentages for a 40-year period of record, ranked by month and year. To determine its target, URSUS focused on the 75th percentile reduction percentage. The rank of the 75th percentile reduction percentage is calculated based on the length of the simulation as 75th percentile rank equals 0.75 times the number of years evaluated plus 1. For this example, based on a 40-year simulation, the 75th percentile corresponds to the 31st highest reduction percentage. So we multiply 0.75 times 41. However, the team decided to choose a single annual target because its planned control option for Step 4 provides a reduction in withdrawal over the entire course of the year. So it based it on the most stringent 75th percentile monthly reduction, which is 39%. This allowed URSIS to calculate its target using equation 2 from the guidance. With a present day pressure of 0.83 million liters per month and the 39% reduction requirement, URSIS has a target of 0.51 million liters per month. Note that as an alternative to the single annual target, URSIS could have specified monthly targets using each month's 75th percentile reduction percentage in Table 2. Because the pressure reduction target is above 25%, the URSIS team can submit its target with a target year of up to 10 years from the submission date. The team submitted 2030 as the target year, 6 years from submission. Now, let's look at how the URSIS team set a freshwater quality target. We saw that the required reduction percentage calculated from equation 3 is 73%. Globally developed freshwater quality targets are specified on an annual basis, so the application of the Step 3 technical guidance indicates that URSIS science-based target for freshwater quality for a present-day pressure of 28,800 kilograms per year and a required reduction of 73% results in a target of 7,800 kilograms of phosphorus per year. The URSIS team submitted 2034 as the target year, 10 years from submission. The validation checklist and criteria are very similar for freshwater quality targets, with a few exceptions. The spatial scope or resolution of the target should be consistent with the local model, if used, or the Fafstetter Level 6, which aligns with the McDowell Global Dataset. Baseline data requirements are the same for water quality as water quantity, including separating out operations and upstream impacts, and use of the last 5 years of data, if available. Documentation should demonstrate the use of the specified approaches for the water quality basin-wide reduction calculation, which is similar to the water quantity approaches. For water quality, documentation should show that the final company target was determined using equation 4 and is expressed as a maximum nutrient load in terms of mass of nutrient per year within a specified time frame. Required documentation for stakeholder engagement, model selection, and target timelines are the same for water quality target setting as for water quantity. So, what do freshwater targets look like? Here is some target language that can apply to different companies looking to set targets on an annual or monthly basis for water quantity and water quality, specifically on water use, which are withdrawals from surface water bodies and groundwater, and freshwater pollution resulting from nitrogen and phosphorus. As we conclude our module, we wanted to leave here some key considerations to think about as you prefer to validate your targets. It is important to stress, however, that companies are required to submit steps sequentially. Therefore, it is not possible to submit Step 3 without first passing Step 1 and Step 2 validation. Once the validation process is further refined by the Accountability Accelerator, a validation platform will be released to make this process easier for companies, ensuring all communication with validators occurs on this system to ensure data security and confidentiality. This marks the end of our last module. By setting science-based targets for freshwater, companies will be able to align their own commitments to nature with the necessary speed and scale of action as determined by science and clearly communicated to their stakeholders and the public. To test your learnings from this module, we have put together a knowledge test, which will be compulsory for any individual seeking to remain in SBTN's referral program. A link to the test will be made available on SBTN's website after this module is released, and you'll be able to take this test as many times as needed to pass and certify your understanding of this module. With that, this marks the end of our Train the Trainer curriculum. Now that you've learned how to set science-based targets for land and freshwater, the next step will be to take action to meet these targets. As more comprehensive guidance is released in 2025 on how to continue with the 5-step framework with the Step 4 Act and Step 5 Track, we'll be working on expanding this Train the Trainer curriculum to ensure a full uptake of our methods. In the meantime, SBTN's Response Options database provides initial resources for companies to take actions that make a difference for nature on the ground using the Action Framework, AR3T, a general framework for company action to avoid and reduce pressures on nature loss, regenerate and restore so that nature can recover, and transform underlying systems in which companies are embedded to address the drivers of nature loss.